sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
You guys wanted us to take a deep dive into what happened earlier at Antioch High School in Nashville.
Yeah.
And it's heavy stuff, but we're going to try to unpack it.
Yeah.
As best we can with the information that we have so far.
Absolutely. And it is a developing situation. So, we're going to be looking at this CBS News article, but it's constantly being updated. So,
Right.
We're really seeing information come in as we speak.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
This morning, around 11:09 a.m., a 17-year-old student named Solomon Henderson opened fire in the school cafeteria, and he tragically killed a 16-year-old student, Jocelyn Correa Escalante.
And then took his own life, right?
And then took his own life, yeah.
So that's a detail that I think immediately kind of raises questions for investigators. Was this a planned act with others caught in the crossfire? Or,
Right.
Was it more of an impulsive act that's something they'll have to try to piece together?
Yeah, it's a horrifying thought either way.
Okay.
There were two other students who were injured during this event. One was grazed by a bullet. Thankfully, it was a minor injury. And another student received a facial injury. But it sounds like that happened during the rush to escape, not from a gunshot.
Yeah, and I think, even those injuries that weren't directly from gunshots just really highlight just the ripple effect of terror and panic that these events cause. The trauma extends so far beyond just Jocelyn and Solomon.
Absolutely, and this is where it takes an even more disturbing turn. Henderson live-streamed at least part of the shooting on a platform called KCK. For those of you who aren't familiar with KCK, it's similar to Twitch, but it's known for having less stringent content moderation policies. Yeah. Although they do have rules against violence.
Yeah, that's that detail about the live stream, I think, really adds another crucial element for investigators to examine. Did KCK play a role in Henderson's actions? Was he seeking notoriety? Was there something specific on that platform that might have influenced him? These are questions that investigators are going to be asking.
It makes you think about the responsibility these platforms have when it comes to moderating content, especially considering the potential for harm and the fact that a lot of these platforms are used by younger audiences.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really complex issue with no easy answers. Where do we draw the line between freedom of expression and preventing these potentially dangerous situations? There's a lot to unpack there.
So going back to what happened at the school, police response time was incredibly fast. They were on scene within 2 minutes of the first shots being fired, which, speaks to their preparedness, but it's still devastating that they couldn't prevent this.
I think it really underlines the fact that even with, the best protocols and training in place, tragedies like this can still occur. It really underscores the difficult reality that we're facing.
And to add to that, the escalation of events was shockingly fast. Henderson took the bus to school, went into a restroom, possibly to retrieve a gun, and then immediately went to the cafeteria and confronted Escalante. It all happened within minutes.
Yeah, this rapid escalation is something we see in so many of these cases, and it makes prevention incredibly difficult. It speaks to the impulsivity that can sometimes be a factor, particularly with teenagers. And it just highlights, the critical need for early intervention when there are warning signs.
Which leads to the question, did anyone notice anything unusual about Henderson's behavior leading up to this?
Right. That's going to be another key question for investigators. Were there any red flags? Was there anything that could have been done to intervene before it reached this point? And unfortunately, those are questions that, always arise after tragedies like this.
And of course, the most pressing question, what was Henderson's motive? Was Jocelyn targeted? Or was this a random act of violence?
Yeah. Understanding the motive is so crucial, for putting this into context. Was this a personal grievance? Was there some sort of underlying mental health crisis? Was it something more ideological, potentially influenced by extremist views or online communities? Hopefully the investigation will shed some light on this, but it's possible we may never have a definitive answer.
This brings us to the conversation surrounding school security. Antioch High already had security measures in place. They had school resource officers, security cameras equipped with weapon detection software, secure entry vestibules. Clearly, it wasn't enough.
Yeah, this is something that, raises a lot of questions about the effectiveness of those measures while they're intended to deter violence. Do they actually do so, or do they just simply create this false sense of security? And, what's the trade-off? How much security is enough without, making a school feel like a prison? It's a delicate balancing act with no simple solutions.
And now the school district is considering adding metal detectors. But they've also acknowledged that metal detectors have limitations and could lead to other unintended consequences. So it's a difficult decision to make.
It's a classic dilemma. We want to do everything we can to prevent another tragedy like this, but we also don't want to turn schools into fortresses. Finding that right balance is a conversation that needs to involve everyone: educators, parents, students, security experts. Everybody has a stake in this.
This event, as horrific as it is, forces us to confront some difficult truths. And as you know, this isn't an isolated incident.
Right. This is where the statistics become really alarming. In 2024, there were 69 victims of school shootings across the country.
Wow.
And we're just 3 weeks into 2025, and we've already seen 10 incidents.
It's staggering. And there's a group called the K-12 School Shooting Database that tracks all these incidents, and that includes shootings anytime a gun is fired on school property or even brandished. And they documented over 330 incidents in 2024 alone.
That's a really crucial point. I think, the scope of the problem is often underestimated. We tend to focus on the mass shootings, but the reality is that gun violence in schools is a much broader issue. It demands a much more comprehensive response.
So where do we go from here? What steps can we take to prevent this from happening again? What changes need to be made?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answers. But I think it starts with honest conversations, acknowledging the problem, and being willing to explore all options, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in the next part of our deep dive.
So we've been discussing this heartbreaking shooting at Antioch High.
Yeah.
And the complexities that surround these events. You're probably wondering, where do we even begin to address this? It feels like such an overwhelming issue with no easy answers.
You're right. There's no magic wand we can wave,
Right.
There's no single solution, but we can kind of examine some of the ideas being discussed and try to understand their potential impact.
Okay, so let's start with gun control, a topic that always seems to come up in these discussions. Advocates for stricter gun laws, they often argue that making it harder to obtain firearms, especially for those who pose a threat, could reduce the number of school shootings.
Right, that's one perspective, and it certainly makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But we also have to acknowledge the reality of the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, which is a deeply held belief for many Americans.
Right, and opponents of stricter gun control, they argue that it infringes on their constitutional rights and that the focus should be on what they see as the root causes of violence, things like mental health.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the other side of the coin, right? The role of mental health. When tragedies like this happen, there's always a call for better mental health resources, particularly for young people.
It's true. And we know that many shooters have a history of mental health challenges, things like depression, anxiety, social isolation.
But simply saying, we need better mental health resources is a vast oversimplification.
Right.
What does that actually look like in practice? How can we make a tangible difference in schools and communities?
So if we dig deeper into mental health, what are some practical solutions that could be implemented?
Well, one crucial step is increasing access to mental health services, ensuring that there are enough qualified professionals available, and making those services affordable and accessible to everyone, regardless of their income or insurance coverage.
That makes sense. But we also have to address the stigma surrounding mental health people. Especially teens might be reluctant to seek help if they feel ashamed or embarrassed.
Absolutely. Reducing the stigma is essential. We need to create a culture where talking about mental health is normalized, where seeking help is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness. That shift needs to happen in schools, families, and in society as a whole.
So it sounds like we need to approach this from multiple angles: increasing access to mental health services, changing perceptions around mental health, and maybe looking at ways to improve school security as well. It's a lot to tackle.
It is, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. It starts with recognizing the urgency of the problem and a willingness to work together to find solutions. It requires collaboration, between lawmakers, educators, mental health professionals, law enforcement, and communities. We all have a role to play.
And let's not forget the role of parents and families. They're often the first to notice changes in their children's behavior and are in a unique position to intervene.
That's a great point. Parents and caregivers need the tools and resources to recognize potential warning signs and to know where to turn for help. We need to empower them to be proactive in supporting their children's mental and emotional well-being.
It strikes me that we often teach kids about physical safety, like looking both ways before crossing the street, but we don't always do a great job teaching them about mental and emotional well-being. It's like we're missing a crucial part of the equation.
You've hit on something really important. We need to equip young people with the tools and resources to navigate the challenges they face, to build resilience, and to develop healthy coping mechanisms. These skills are just as important as any academic subject they learn in school.
So it seems like this goes beyond simply preventing school shootings. It's about creating a society where young people feel supported, connected, and hopeful about the future. If we can achieve that, maybe we can start to chip away at the root causes of these tragedies.
That's a powerful way to put it. It's about fostering a sense of community where everyone feels safe, valued, and empowered to reach their full potential.
Man, it's a lot to process. We've talked about gun control mental health, the role of social media school security.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of this issue. It almost feels like it's too big to tackle.
I understand that feeling. It's a heavy topic, and the solutions aren't always clear-cut. But I think it's important to remember that even small actions can contribute to positive change.
I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. Like, what can we as individuals do that will actually make a difference? It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these events.
Well, for one, we can start by educating ourselves. The more we understand about the issue, the risk factors, the warning signs, the resources available, the better equipped we are to recognize potential problems and intervene early.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Hmm?
But where do we even begin to find reliable information on such a complex topic?
There are a lot of reputable organizations that are dedicated to researching and addressing gun violence and school safety. The K-12 school shooting database that we mentioned earlier is a great resource for data and analysis. Groups like Everytown for Gun Safety and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention offer valuable information and resources. You can also find helpful information on government websites like the Department of Education and the National Institute of Mental Health.
So once we have a better understanding, what can we do with that knowledge?
We can have open conversations. Talk to your friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, share what you've learned, encourage others to do the same. You'd be surprised how powerful these everyday conversations can be in raising awareness and shifting perspectives.
It's about creating a culture of awareness and support, right? Where people feel comfortable talking about these issues and seeking help when they need it.
Exactly. And if you're feeling particularly passionate about this issue, you can advocate for change. Contact your elected officials and voice your concerns. Support organizations that are working to prevent gun violence or those advocating for better mental health resources. Even small acts of advocacy can make a difference.
It's a reminder that we're not helpless. Our voices and actions can have an impact.
Absolutely. And sometimes those seemingly small actions can create a ripple effect, inspiring others to get involved and demand change. You never know who you might influence or what kind of movement you might spark.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the tragic events at Antioch High, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to not turn away from this issue. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, to want to just shut it out, but we can't afford to do that. These are our children, our communities, our future. We have a responsibility to stay informed, engage in constructive dialogue, and work towards solutions no matter how small they may seem.
And it's crucial to remember that even amidst tragedy, there is hope. There are countless people who are working tirelessly to prevent future tragedies, to support victims and their families, and to create a safer and more compassionate world.
Yeah, this shooting, as horrific as it was, forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our society. But it also presents a unique opportunity for growth, change, and healing. It's up to all of us to decide what kind of future we want to create.
Those are powerful words to end on. And as you continue to process this event and the many questions it raises, think about this. If you had the power to change one thing to prevent future school shootings, what would it be? And what concrete steps, big or small, can you take today to make that vision a reality? Thank you for joining us for this difficult but incredibly important deep dive.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.